What's up, everybody? Billtendo here, and today I want to talk a little bit about what's currently going on with Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons was bought many years ago by Wizards of the Coast, who own Magic the Gathering. They are then owned by Hasbro, the toy company. Now, earlier last year, later last year, Hasbro started getting a lot of negative feedback from the community about Magic the Gathering, basically because during the pandemic, Magic kind of blew up a little bit at the time, like a lot of things did. Video games went off the rails, hobbies just increased in general during the pandemic because we were all locked in. And so instead of timely release of new additional sets, they just started slinging out new sets, new cards, and what they did was they pretty much crashed the secondary market. People are not buying, selling, trading the new series of Magic as much because they were heavily overprinted. So Hasbro is now looking for other ways for Wizards of the Coast to make more money, and they've decided to focus on the OGL, which is the licensing agreement that everyone uses for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, everyone knows Dungeons and Dragons, and a lot of people can't even name a second competitor in that space because Dungeons and Dragons is so huge. It's just so large on its own. And a lot of that has to do with the original licensing agreement, which means anyone can make supplemental material for Dungeons and Dragons. I can write my own source book for Dungeons and Dragons and pay a small percentage or what have you to Wizards of the Coast when that's necessary. You look at a company like Pathfinder. Pathfinder is a titan in the Dungeons and Dragons world now, and simply because they had some really good Kickstarter campaigns. And they just started cranking out quality material for Dungeons and Dragons. And so the people are leaking the new agreement. The OGL is called OGL 1.1 because right now you have OGL 1. This is the licensing agreement everyone has worked on. And what is essentially happening is it is a blatant cash grab, and I think it's going to backfire spectacularly. You can mark my words. I am 100% right about this. I know it in my heart. I see it as a fan, as a player, as a creative person myself. I understand this completely from the player and creator side. So what they've decided to do is, number one, if you sell over $750,000 in a year, you now have to pay Wizards of the Coast 25% of that money. Now, that means if you do a Kickstarter for $750,000, their cutoff limit for that, which Pathfinder probably would do, they have to pay 25% of that, whether it's profitable or not, to Wizards of the Coast, which puts them in a hole, and now they can't afford to produce what people signed up for them to produce because Wizards of the Coast is taking such a large chunk of that. But that is not the biggest problem. Them taking money is a big problem. The much larger problem in the OGL community is now, if you publish anything with Dungeons and Dragons, they can take it, use it however they see fit. They have the rights to it worldwide. So, someone like myself, say, I have a source that I wrote. I created a couple monsters, and these get popular, and people are buying them from me for $25 each. And man, I've made $1,000. I'm doing really good on the creation of this monster. People want to include it in their game. It's great. Fantastic. Wizards of the Coast can now take that, and they can add it to their book or publish it on its own worldwide and make $5 million on it, and they owe me nothing. We have one guy who's writing a source book on the American Revolution for a tabletop RPG style game right now, and he does not want to publish it because he has other books that he has written that are source material for Dungeons and Dragons, and he doesn't want Wizards of the Coast licensing agreement to also apply to this book, which technically by their own admission, it can. So now they can grab creators' other works, and now they own the other works of creators that don't have anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons. It's a really, really, this is one of the most restrictive licensing agreements that has ever existed. It is so far that Wizards of the Coast has contacted Kickstarter themselves, because there have been many, many successful campaigns on Kickstarter for Dungeons and Dragons stuff, whether it be source books, artwork, whatever, just maps, figures, all kinds of stuff. And they contacted Kickstarter and told Kickstarter that they're going to have to take 25% of the money to give it to them before the money even goes to the creators, because they own the copyright to Dungeons and Dragons, which is completely insane. I have personally never heard of such a thing before, and Kickstarter being a little more in the interest of the creators, because that's their business. You know, if people aren't creating, Kickstarter's not making any money. So they negotiated in good faith with Wizards of the Coast and brought it down to Kickstarter only being at 20%. Everywhere else, it's still 25%. Where I see this is headed, I see publishers like Pathfinder and some of the other top third-party publishers that are not Wizards of the Coast. I see all these guys creating a source of their own, a competitive source. And if they put all of their creativity, because all they have to do is change a couple words realistically, and they're no longer Dungeons and Dragons, they're doing something else. It's a separate creation. So I would say, I would not be surprised to see Pathfinder and a couple of these other large third-party publishers come up with their own free, open source competitor to Dungeons and Dragons that they can all create for, and they don't owe anyone any royalties. Players can choose if they want to buy from whatever publisher, and that would be fantastic. But I personally think that's the direction it's going to go in. And yeah, the whole situation is crazy. Also, the one last thing, the OGL 1.1 actually conflicts with the original OGL licensing agreement that you sign to make Dungeons and Dragons stuff that has been active up until now, that no changes can be made to the licensing agreement. But Wizards of the Coast has changed it with OGL 1.1. And people could say, oh, well, you don't have to opt into that. And that's fine. The thing on that is, yes, you do. Because say you just finished printing 1,000 manuals for this new expansion that you came up with, and people can't wait to buy it. You have to sign the new OGL. Because if you don't, you're getting a cease and desist letter. You're going to get sued because you're not paying them. So there are a lot of people that have items out there in the world for sale, and it's either burn it or sign the OGL, and it's putting people really over a barrel. It's a really crappy thing. Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro specifically are doing. Hasbro's statement on it, the CEO of Wizards of the Coast, has said that they want their Dungeons and Dragons games to have returning life cycle like video games as far as DLC. And, you know, DLC is kind of like the demise of modern gaming. It's the worst thing about modern gaming. So, pay to play. Okay, so thanks everybody. That's my little rant, and let's see if it comes true. Let's see if my predictions are right. But I think these third-party publishers are just going to give the middle finger to Wizards of the Coast and start their own thing. That's what I would do. All right. Everybody have a great day.